Hey, everybody. Welcome. Today, we've got David Ariansen here. He's going to be a fantastic guest, and we're going to be talking about the state of the job market in data. He's got an amazing perspective to share with you. Here are a few of the questions we're going to be getting into. It'll be kind of a free-flowing conversation, not necessarily super linear, but I guarantee that we will we'll at least talk about these. So, David, let's talk about the high level, kind of ground the conversation in. What do you think about the analytics job market today? I think you're more qualified to answer that than me because you're sort of relatively fresh, have gone through the process. How would you describe it today?
So in 2024, it's not very favorable, especially towards those who are trying to get their first job. So to give you some broader context, I've been teaching analytics at Greensboro College for the past 5 years. So I've kind of got my finger on the pulse of like those entering the workforce from undergrad. But in 2022 and 2023, I actually ran a career services program where I helped 35 students get their first analytics job. And these were people who weren't coming out of college. They were coming from some other career and trying to pivot into their first kind of data-centric role. Yep. I actually shut it down in 2023 because that placement rate was starting to drop more and more and more. It's just a lot more competitive now.
Yeah, and I know 2023 was really rough, and there was a lot of companies were laying people off, so there was tons of talent that was on the sidelines, and it was just a lot more demand, a lot more supply, and not enough demand. Does it still kind of feel like that today? Did it feel tighter than you expected still in 2024?
Well, it's a little bit different because I have 8 years of experience, running a boutique analytics consulting agency. So I'm having inbound offers to interview, I should say, probably once a week, once every other week. But that being said, I did apply to 192 jobs cold.
Wow. Yeah.
And earlier this year, I ended up interviewing at 5 companies, and I got 2 offers from the 5 companies I interviewed from. That being said, that number is even worse in terms of like the conversion from application to interview, because 3 of the 5 companies that I interviewed with were warm leads. So
they were inbound. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's like a 1% conversion rate for somebody who has, 8 years of experience, have a solid portfolio, have a very solid brand in the analytics space.
Yeah. Yeah. So it definitely still feels pretty tight, for somebody to have good experience and still not amazing conversion rates, especially from application to interview. So I think the takeaway for that is like, you got to know what you're doing then. You got to be sharp. Like, no one's going to just stumble into that first role accidentally right now. You got to be really deliberate, really, really smart about the approach. So what do you think it is? Put yourself in the hiring manager's shoes for that first entry-level analyst role. What is that hiring manager looking for? I think that perspective is really important for the audience to get as they're, trying to impress that hiring manager and get that job offer.
Well, can I take your question and pivot it slightly?
Of course.
So instead of what is the hiring manager looking for, let's start with what is the hiring manager looking at? And they're getting thousands upon thousands of applications right now. And I can't remember who was talking about this. One of my previous podcast guests talked about like getting a job is almost like getting inside of a house. You can go through the front door, just kind of like cold applying. Kind of getting in through the back door is like having them reach out to you, and maybe getting in through like the garage door, the side door is getting a referral. So if you're trying to get your first analytics job, I'm not so sure it's a good idea to just cold apply. I think you can do that. And what's interesting about the way that the application process works now is, that 192 jobs, I applied to like 192 jobs in like, 2 or 3 weeks. I just spent like an hour a day, sorted it by posted within the last 24 hours. I did either in person or hybrid because I'm in Greensboro, North Carolina. It's only like 300,000 people in this city. So, you whittle down the candidate pool drastically.
And I want to double click on that. I think there's a little nuanced thing in there. You said you just did jobs that were posted within the last 24 hours.
Right.
The idea there is like, even if it's been up 3 days, they've got 1,000 applications and they're not looking at them anymore. Is that sort of the idea?
So yeah, well, what's interesting about that is the job that I ultimately accepted, I applied 2 months before to that same role, but I applied 7 days after they had posted. So I didn't even get an interview the first hiring round, but then they got probably 1,000 applications from people who weren't qualified. So when they reposted it, a month and a half or so later, I applied within like the first 2 to 3 hours of them posting it. So then that led, it kind of just put my resume back at the top of the stack. So yeah, I mean, and that's I guess one word of caution of, if you're not getting interviews, it may not be that you're not a good candidate. It could be that you're just not going through the appropriate pathways.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Or approaching it in the right way.
Yeah. It could be not necessarily a skill problem, but like a marketing problem or a sales problem. Yeah, totally. What about, so I love that you kind of make the distinction of cold applying versus using your network and getting referrals. For somebody who wants to be getting referrals, but like maybe they just don't know how that works, that's not happening for them right now. Any advice for that person? Because I think a lot of people that are listening right now would fall into that category.
Yeah, so I think the first place to start is within the company you're in now. Like if let's say you're working as a marketing specialist, you can reach out to the people in the analytics department, or, maybe somebody who is a director and all of a sudden a marketing analyst position opens up. They're much more likely to hire somebody who's already been kind of vetted. They're a known entity. They're trusted. So I would start there. So start just kind of networking internally. And it's funny because literally I had a class, I was teaching the class at Greensboro College yesterday, and I was telling my students exactly this. And I could see, I think all of them were introverts. And I don't think that's uncommon for data work or analytics work. Because one of my students right now has an internship in operations for the High Point Rockers, which is like a minor league baseball team. And it's funny because we were having this conversation of like, hey, go ask your manager if you can get your hands on any type of data. And I could see it on his face where he was like, I'm not going to do that. And I was like, kind of pushing him like there's probably nobody, there's probably nobody that has ever asked the High Point Rockers if they can work on their data. So like there's a lot of these kind of opportunities that are just wide open right now. So I think I'm kind of atypical for the analytics space, and then I'm very much an extrovert. I have a sales background, so I'm kind of used to just talking to people, meeting people, kind of networking all the time. So that's where I would start, would be within the current organization that you're in. Next, I would move towards there's probably like a Tableau user group meetup, either within your city or within driving distance of where you are. And then what you can do there is just start volunteering. Just say, hey, I could help you guys set up. And then you start building relationships. The key to effectively nurturing these kinds of relationships is not to immediately ask for something, but provide, some kind of gift or just be thoughtful. Because and I think it's not transactional. That's not how human relationships work.
Yep. Yeah. No, totally. I mean, I get those messages that are just like, hey, can you refer me to a job from somebody I've never even heard of before? And it's
right.
I just can't do it because I don't know them. Me referring somebody to a job is putting my name on the line, so I really only want to do that for somebody that I feel comfortable with, that wouldn't burn the person I'm referring to. So definitely, I love the give before you get. And I also love the advice of if you are currently employed somewhere in a non-data role, but you want to get into data, just try to get your hands on data and start doing some data analysis. Right. And I've seen people do that from marketing, from customer service, and from operations in companies that I've been at in the past, where I think one important nuance is they didn't say like, hey, can I be a data analyst instead of what I'm doing? They just sort of like got their hands on data and started doing data related stuff, like analyzing marketing data, analyzing customer support data, which is it's like a much easier ask to just say, hey boss, can I do this project and start helping us, analyze the volume of customer support queries that come in, something related to the job, versus saying, hey, can I change my job title and move to another department? Like, I think that usually would come later after you've sort of dipped your toe in and just started doing that stuff. So don't make the big ask, make the smaller ask and start showing people that you're a data analyst. And then like that title change can come later, whether at the current company, or you can use that experience, at the next company. So yeah, I think that's really, really good advice. How about the once you got into interview process, like what is a typical interview process looking like in 2024? It's been a while since I've done that type of an interview, so curious how that felt.
Okay, so I really had two different types of interviews. I had interviews where the people reached out to me because they knew who I was. Like, for example, I'm on the board of directors for the business school at Greensboro College. One of the former alumni is the CEO of, oddly enough, the first company to ever do medical testing for COVID is right here in High Point, North Carolina, or like the testing kits, I should say. He reached directly out to me and said, hey, I'm interested in hiring my first analyst. That was kind of like a reverse. And then I'm sitting down with the CEO of the company, and then he was like introducing me to his team. Which was weird because it was almost like I was interviewing them as much as they were interviewing me.
Yeah.
But the reason that one didn't work out is that the head of their IT actually came back and said, our data is so bad that we're not even at a point where we should even hire, like begin to start, like, what's the point of analyzing this data if it's all wrong?
Yep.
So they ended up, kind of going the path of like hiring a database developer and like somebody to like
data engineering work first. Yeah. Yep.
So that's kind of atypical, but the reason I want to bring that up is that if you can do a good job of like building your brand, building the relationships and selling yourself, like you will have companies trying to sell themselves to you eventually. Yeah. Which is kind of like a neat kind of pivot on, kind of this doom and gloom that we're seeing in 2023 and 2024. But okay, getting back to like the typical interview process. So with the fresh market, I cold applied, didn't even get interviewed the first round because there were just this massive of applications coming in. Then they reposted it because there were no valid candidates. And then I got an interview within, I think, 3 or 4 days from that. And that was just a phone screening from HR. The key there is that the girl didn't know anything about analytics. She was just trying to verify, like, are you sane? Are you who you say you are? And then like have you talk a little bit at a high level, which I guess that's a skill unto itself of like, if you're talking to the HR person and you're getting into like joins and SQL, she's
probably
gonna be
not
like,
the place.
She's gonna be like, I don't know anything that he said. So that might actually like hinder you from getting to phase 2. So you need to kind of back out and talk about, what you've done in a high level. Then that moved to a interview directly with the manager that I'm supporting. And that was interesting because it was just kind of pretty laid back. It was just kind of a vibe check. And one thing that I found interesting is that not a single person asked to see my portfolio. And I think that part of that is I've actually done I've run my own business. I've like helped uncover millions of dollars of insights for my clients over the past 8 years. So like the portfolio is just kind of like not as impressive as like actually being able to do something and being like a critical thinker. Because it's funny because I actually asked my manager, I was like, what if I was just lying about all that? And he's like, yeah, I kind of have a BS like radar for it. Because I guess when you say something like, the biggest win I've had is I uncovered a $5 million under optimization for one of my clients. Then it's like, oh, well, tell me more about that. So if you were just lying about it, then that would kind of all crumble apart, right?
Yeah.
Or,
for me, as a hiring manager, like if I catch somebody, it's like one strike, you know,
Right. Yeah.
because like if I know that you're lying about this one project, I don't think I can trust anything else. So it's like immediate red
Right.
flag and you're out. So you definitely got to be careful, but it does happen for sure. You know, so yeah, it's definitely interesting. And I love at the beginning of your answer, you were talking about how it's just better to be hunted than to have to go hunt yourself, right? Like if
Right.
you can
Yeah.
get inbound, the dynamic is so much better. And I've experienced that in my
Right.
own career too, where it's like if people are coming to you, you're sort of saying, yeah, maybe I'd work for you. Let's how interesting
Yeah.
can you make it, right? Like it's such a
Right.
better dynamic. And folks, like you've got a lot of experience. You ran the consultancy, so it makes sense that you're kind of in a different dynamic than a lot of folks who are just trying to get that first job. But there are still things
Right.
that they can do, like you said, like being active, showing off the skills that they have, whether that's online, going to a Tableau user group in the nearest city. Like those can still sort of create those dynamics, maybe on a bit of a smaller scale, but I still think they can work. We've seen it happen for a lot of our students where they just kind of get active. They start showing their work online. They start participating in data challenges and showing what they can do. And it eventually leads to a conversation with a hiring manager that's like, hey, I saw you doing this for the past couple of months. We actually have a role open right now. Do you want to come in and give a presentation to get the job? And it's a very different,
Right.
just
Yeah.
a different dynamic, you know? So yeah.
Yeah. Well, also too, so there's typically 3 phases from the like normal. So after I met with my manager, I eventually then got brought in person, got to meet my manager, and then I did a panel interview with the team I would be working with. And then the other director that I kind of work in like a matrix structure where it's like I have the senior director of merchandising is my manager, but then I also interface with my category manager and then the director of kind of the department, and then that category manager is the sub department. What's one thing that I think is interesting is because I'm interested in this because I'm helping my students get the job. So I've asked my manager, a little bit about, like what was the experience like hiring? And he said that there was one person that was ahead of me that had 30 years of experience. And honestly, this would probably be a demotion for him. But he knew like how everything worked. He just wanted to be in, North Carolina to be closer to his kids or something like that. But then he had the panel interview, and then he interviewed with the other director. And what was interesting is that he didn't pass the vibe check with her. Because I don't think he said it. He said some version of like, "Don't worry about it, sweetheart."
Yep.
So she like that pinged her radar of like, oh, this guy's kind of a know-it-all asshole. And he might be a little bit misogynistic. And then she shut it down because he would have gotten the job before me. But a lot of interviewing is almost like going on a first date. Like there are all these like little green or red flags that you might signal, knowingly or unknowingly.
Yeah. You got to be careful. It's interesting. I got feedback when I was a candidate for a job a long time ago. The recruiting manager, so they're not in the analytics group. They're really just like large scale trying to put bodies in the door for this big company. And he called me the day after the thing and he said, hey, look, here's some feedback. And some of the feedback was negative. And one of the things I think I made just like a little passing comment that I said, like, it wasn't the sexiest project or something like that. Yeah. And I didn't mean anything by it, like, but that language was picked up as one of the interviewers. She's like, oh, I didn't like that he used that language. And I thought it was a very benign thing. So you just, you got to be careful. I did end up getting the job. It wasn't like they said, don't extend an offer, but it was enough that she reported it and it got relayed to me, which I liked that they did give me feedback, even when extending an offer. They said like, hey, here's the things we didn't like about you, which was, I thought was kind of unusual, but I liked a lot. So,
well, it sounds like that was a beige flag, not necessarily a red flag.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It was pretty benign. So, this is really, really good so far. Let's see. How about, so if somebody is like just kind of getting started in the job market, or like there's a few people here that are saying they're doing tons of applications. We've got, Tiffany said she's done 90 applications. Heather said she's done 300. Any specific tips for them to try to cut through? Like, is it skills they should be focusing on that might make them stand out? Like anything else they can do to help those conversion rates?
I would say it's probably less skills focused, but more so like critical thinking. Like if you can show that you know how to learn, and also that like you've actually done something in your career, and it's hard for part of the way that I teach at Greensboro College. It's all application based, like the local YMCA reached out and we're doing a project for them. So like my students have tangible projects with real companies, real data. They can, and I also coach them on like how to explain the project effectively. It's not just, hey, solve this problem, you got an A on this test. Like that's so flawed and surface level. And it'll be interesting to see, I mean, this is a tangent, if higher education is going to like adapt or if it's going to get completely just go the way of the dinosaur. Because right now, I would say the way that colleges, 99% of the colleges are teaching it is not very effective for.
Yeah. And it's interesting to hear your perspective on that as somebody on the inside at higher ed, I
actually signed up for one of the local MBA like mentorship programs.
Yep.
And one of my mentees is actually dropping out from their MBA because it's so bad.
Just didn't make sense. Yeah.
Well, it's just like you're not learning. You're paying thousands of dollars and you're not learning anything, or you're learning something that's like 15, 20 years old, or like like SaaS. Like what companies use SaaS?
Yeah. But like, every higher ed teaches you SaaS and SPSS still probably,
Right.
Like,
and it's like,
just because they're academically focused products. Right.
And it's, I don't know. I wonder if we're going to get to a point where the college degree doesn't matter. It does matter. I guess let me clarify. Because I have two mentees. One's probably going to drop out. The other one works at a name brand company that's got a national headquarters in Greensboro. She's getting the MBA because the jobs that she wants, like the career path she wants, like within that, it's a multinational company. They use MBA or master's degree to thin the candidate pool. So that company is paying for the majority of it. So I think it makes sense that for her. The other mentee is going directly from undergrad to an MBA, which I don't think is a very good idea in most cases.
Yeah, I don't think that's you're not going to like come out with no experience in the job market and then all of a sudden be a manager or a director of a team, which is, I think, what they think they're doing by getting this, an MBA, but that's just not how it works in the real world. Yeah. I had a similar experience so I was studying for a master's in predictive analytics, and I was about halfway through the program. It was going to be like 4 years because it was part-time at night. And so I'd done 2 years of it, and I just got to a point where my day job was like getting pretty demanding. And I didn't feel like I could stretch to do both. And I looked at it, I was like, I either have to get a different job that's less demanding, or I need to drop this night program. And I just kind of did the math, and I was like, I feel like I'm learning a ton in my job from doing the hands-on work. I'm probably learning more than I'm doing at night, and they're paying me. And like, if I focus there, I can advance faster, versus like I can pay Northwestern tuition to learn less, and they're nobody's paying me. So to me, it ended up being, once I realized I couldn't do both, it was an easy thing for me, and I never finished it. I didn't go back, and I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I focused on the startup that was a little more intensive. But yeah, I'm curious. It's like education just keeps getting more and more expensive at higher ed institutes, and if they're not really focused on the career outcome and teaching the right way, like at some point the math just doesn't work. And I personally, I think we're already past that at a lot of schools. So.
Well, it's going to get to a point where it flips instead of being like an economic or an indicator or a signal of like this person's top notch. It's like it's going to say the opposite. Oh, this person's kind of dumb. Like they spent money to learn something that is like not as, because we were going over a case study yesterday in class, and it's like we were talking about sell-through rates, and I modeled it after, you know, what I'm basically doing on a weekly basis in my job. And it's like you get one, we go through that case study once versus I've got to own that process. You know, like the big thing that we're pushing for right now is making the business more profitable. You know, if you buy too many things and you don't sell them, you just got to throw that excess inventory out. So like having to really understand that problem and then solve it, because it changes every single week, you know, like we had 2 hurricanes. So like 3 of our stores have been completely wiped out. Like what is the implication there on inventory, you know?
Yep. Yeah. And you got to be able to think on the fly like that. And, you know,
right. Versus like the right answer is C, you know, like I'll get off my high horse though. I'm just astonished at the state of higher education right now, and not all higher. I think, you know, probably the top 10% I think are pretty rigorous, but you know, quite a few of the other ones.
It makes a lot of sense. So John David, what I think if we could get back to the questions tab is actually filling up pretty fast. So you guys in the audience, you've done a great job of throwing questions on there. So let's get into some of these questions. So this is the most upvoted question right now. John David, do you think applying through LinkedIn is effective? If not, what's the most effective way to apply to a job? And I know, let's say separate from the trying to get referrals, because I think that was your pitch, is like, that's the best way in. If aside from doing referrals, is LinkedIn the best place? Are there other job boards, like company pages? What do you think?
I think I had 3 inbound job or interviews, and then 2 came from LinkedIn. So I'm getting a 1% conversion rate there. That being said, just apply to 100 jobs and you get 1 interview. Maybe it's more so just setting the right expectations.
Yeah.
And you don't have to think about it from like a systems view of, okay, I'm on the job hunt. I'm going to spend 45 minutes every morning before I go to work checking the last 24 hours of job postings. And I really think that filter of 24 hours is key there, because you're just wasting your time if it goes a day, 2, or even a week. I think what's happening a little bit right now is companies are also thinking that they almost have like a delusional sense of themselves, I think.
Yeah.
Like they want that unicorn candidate. And I think that maybe on some level psychologically, they're like, well, I just had 3,000 applications. There's got to be 1 unicorn in this pile here. And I don't think so, though.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're probably right. And I haven't applied through LinkedIn in a while, but probably about 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 to 2 years ago, I was hiring some people through LinkedIn. So I can kind of talk about that a little bit. I hired a couple people on the marketing team, so it's a little bit different, but you know, I posted marketing roles, probably got like 100 applications. You really have to skim them quickly, because like you can't spend an hour on each person, right? So I'm probably looking at each application for like 10 seconds. Came up with a short list. LinkedIn lets you flag ones you like or ones that you don't like, and then you can kind of go through your short list. And I think I interviewed maybe 3 to 4 people for each of those roles. I did hire a candidate from LinkedIn for both of the 2 marketing roles, and they're both amazing. They're still at the company. Actually, shout out Corinne, I think is in the room right now. But just to get a rough sense for like, that's how the numbers worked for me. 100 applications, 4 interviews, maybe even only 3, and 1 hire. So just to kind of give a sense of what you can expect, like you're not going to get a call back for every application you put in, especially if you're maybe not the most qualified for the role.
Right. So yeah, so I think, you know, putting the right filters in place, you know, one thing I noticed running my career services program is that and maybe this is counterintuitive on some level, the students I had that were in like New York City or LA had a harder time getting an analytics job than those that were in like Greenville, South Carolina.
Huh.
And I think part of that is, I think it has to do with the pure volume. Like in Greensboro, I've talked to my manager directly about this. There's a shortage of analytics talent. But if you go to New York City, there's a ton of people who've been working with data for years and have insane skills. Same with like LA. So I think part of the reason why it's coming off to me, at least, as counterintuitive is that you used to move to the big city for the opportunity. And I don't think that mental paradigm really works anymore. Yeah. Especially with, how everything's remote or you can go hybrid. Because actually somebody on my team lives in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we have a hybrid schedule. So he commutes, it's an hour and a half here, an hour and a half back. So 3 hours a day for 3 days of the week.
Oh, that actually makes me think. So, because you applied to both types of roles, some remote, some in person, some hybrid, right? When you were.
Yeah, well, I also applied to remote jobs, but I got 0 interviews for them. So I just stopped.
That was going to be my question. Is it just so competitive on the remote side? Because at this point, like everybody wants a remote job, that you're likely to have better results. And it sounds like that's in your case, the hybrid or the in-person ones,
right?
You were able to get a lot more.
Well, because I was using it as a filter to like filter out the competition, because I think I set it to like within a 50-mile radius of Greensboro. And I see Stephen McAllister is saying he lives in Charlotte, which is Charlotte and Raleigh are about the same equidistance from Greensboro. So yeah, Stephen, you may want to go ahead and apply to Greensboro roles. Because we actually recently hired somebody on my team, and it's tough. I kind of feel for the hiring managers in this area.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Maybe they should open up remote and that's been really good for us at Maven to be able to get people from all over the world and stuff. But not a lot of companies are. I feel like it's the remote demand has come back a little bit. Like companies seem to be a little more averse to it right now, which is not how I think, but I think a lot of companies, yeah.
I think there might be a little bit more, there's a lot more moving parts to, running a grocery chain with 165 stores, Yeah. So I think the hybrid role works well because it's like we can pack out the beginning of the week with meetings, and it's just,
yeah.
I think, maybe it's just my experience, but it seems much more effective to be in the room with someone because then you can kind of feel the temperature, you can like read body language. Also, too, it's like you can just, if you're at your desk, you can go talk to the person next to you and get input versus I guess you could do that on Teams as well, but it's not quite the same flavor, I think.
Yeah. There's absolutely strengths and weaknesses to each approach for sure. Yeah, cool. All right. Well, yeah, good to get your take on that. And especially it was just interesting that like trying to break into a remote role seemed like impossible just because the competition's so crazy. How about this next question? So this is another like a really high level one from Kunal. Will data analytics boom again, or should I have a backup career or plan? Like, what do you think about that? Is the current kind of like tightness in the market, does that mean this is no longer a good career path, or what do you think?
Okay, so I think what we were experiencing back when I got into content creation for analytics is what we're experiencing with AI right now. So I think the boom is probably gone. That being said, I think that having the skill set is going to be, it's table stakes at this point. To where if you have the data skills, you can work in sales, you can work in operations, you can work in supply chain. I don't necessarily think you need to have a backup career, but maybe you need to kind of reframe who you are. Because I guess let me root down on my personal experience. So running the consulting agency for the last 8 years, I've worked with supply chain data, sales data, marketing data, all across. That actually set me up perfectly for a category analyst role because I've got to look at, the cross section of marketing, sales, inventory, supply chain, all of that. I think category analyst might be on the harder side of an analytics job to hire for, just because you've got to have mental models of like, how does marketing work? How does sales work? How does, the demand planning and inventory management to support those sales? Like there's a lot of moving parts there versus, like just a business intelligence role. You're kind of focusing on data itself, which I enjoy more. I think sometimes I feel like I'm marauding around as a business person with like a thin veneer of data skills.
Yep.
Like it's like the data is the Trojan horse that gets me, past the gates. But I'm much more interested in business problems and
the actual business outcome. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where the real value is. And yeah, I think I think the nugget in there that I think is really valuable is that piece. Like you need the data skills, but you also need some business acumen and domain knowledge. And I'm thinking about my career when I've hired analysts. I've never said like, I just need a data analyst. Like I've said, I need a marketing analyst, or I need a product analyst, or
Right.
like I need an analyst to help me optimize this call center. So like it's always with this specific domain involved, every single job I've ever hired for, right? And and not to say that I wouldn't take somebody who doesn't have that domain experience, but if they're already positioning themselves like that and they're talking about having done similar things in marketing or in product, they just have such a leg up over somebody that like, okay, I'm going to have to teach you some of the data stuff and the whole domain, or they're coming with the data skills and some domain knowledge. It's just a slam dunk.
Yeah, actually, so when I interviewed on the other side of Winston-Salem is a small town called Clemens, and there's an aerospace company there that interviewed me for a supply chain analyst role. And it was interesting because I had actually had that exact conversation of, okay, I've got the data skills down pat. I have worked with supply chain data, but I'm not a supply chain like expert by any means. And he was saying, I think it would be easier to teach kind of the business side of that with somebody who has like at least the foundation, rather than teaching someone who just does supply chain work how to, develop Power BI dashboards, how to build like, some forecasting or predictive modeling. But I mean, I guess that's a bit of a toss up there though, like which one is harder to learn. But also getting back to why I think it's a good idea to like root down on a specific domain is that it helps you identify what not to learn.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there are people that just get caught in this like hamster wheel of just learning, like what is that meme where it's like one of the Chinese communist generals and he's got all the badges and it's like, this is the LinkedIn learning super user. And it's like,
yeah, you think you're never done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And because I think it's also backwards. Like I think you should learn the data skills based on the problem you have to solve.
Yeah, I think that's really smart, and I think that focus helps a ton. Let's grab this question. This one's from Tiffany. So Tiffany says ageism is a real thing. I was wondering, what would you suggest would help convince a hiring manager to look beyond age and focus on the portfolio and ability to do the work? Yeah, have many of your students been kind of like more advanced in their careers, or does it tend to be kind of on the earlier side, John Dave? Like, are you mostly dealing with like 22-year-old, et cetera?
Okay, so in my career services program, I think the oldest person I placed was like 55, maybe.
Nice.
So yeah, ageism is definitely a thing, but also too, I think a lot of people just stop learning after like 26.
Yeah.
Like they just like, all right, I'm set. This is what I am. This is my life. I've got my creature comforts. I'm going to kind of rinse and repeat, do the same thing over and over again. So one way to like kind of bump that kind of frame of like you're old is to be like just youthful and excited and learn new things. But yeah, I think that specifically within data and analytics, most of the people are kind of on the younger end.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I feel like I don't have a super strong answer other than just make sure that you are staying current with what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And Tiffany, I can speak to that one too a little bit. So I think like, first of all, I think like David acknowledged it, that like you have too. Ageism is definitely a thing. You know, there's people are going to look at you potentially differently a little bit. But I think what's interesting is there's some negatives to that, but then there can also be some positives. And so I'm jumping to a number of people that we've worked with at Maven, same thing, that were had other careers, 10 years doing something, 20, 25 years doing something else. And they were sort of asking the same question and saying, hey, I think I might be too old. And we're like, no, you're not. You know, it's about the positioning, because somebody who's done other things for a long time, they bring a lot to the table that the 22-year-old does not have. You know, like a lot more experience with business, a lot more experience working with teams of people in a professional setting, probably more experience like doing presentations and talking to people. I think these are things that are really important to a data person. So I think it's just really smart to think about your strengths and don't get too caught up in it. This is when you touched on this a little bit earlier, that a lot of us in data, and you're not in that group, and you know,
Yeah.
I'm probably on the border, but a lot of us are introverts. How do you stand out as somebody who kind of like wants to hang back behind the keyboard and not be, maybe isn't a social butterfly like John David Ariansen is?
I guess how to stand out. Like you're going to have to put energy towards like making. You're going to have to buck that trend that you have of like kind of receding or being quiet, and it's going to feel really uncomfortable. And it's funny because my girlfriend's actually an HR analyst at the same company that I'm working at now, and she's much more introverted than I am. And yeah, it definitely takes like because I host meetups for like analysts in Greensboro, and I've noticed that she does get like anxiety. She's actually in the other room. I hope she can't hear me. She gets anxiety in the car ride over, and it's like maybe do some work around like figuring out, you know, when is it time to recharge? Like how much is it draining you? And just figuring out how to kind of push through that. I feel like I don't have a really good answer because it's not me. Yeah, you're just going to have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah. I think I'm a little more introverted, but you know, I think your advice is good, but it's hard, and you know, just practicing makes a lot of sense. How about this one? This is a curious one. So this is from Dania. Are Microsoft certifications relevant to get the job? So I'm thinking she's probably talking about like the, you know, like a MO201 Excel specialist certification or the PL300 Power BI certification. What do you think about that? Do you recommend folks going through those?
Honestly, I think it's just a cash grab from Microsoft or
From them,
whoever.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that they're just trying to figure out a way to extract more money from you.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that's great that you know where to click this button, but like, what have you done with that? You know, like there's that it's almost kind of getting back to the old school way of like how education is taught. Like the correct answer is C or B or whatever. It's very flat. We live in a much more dynamic kind of ecosystem now. Like you can go out and download data. Like you've got the data playground. Like I literally had my students go in and start pulling your data, and you know, some of it's not structured very well. So it's like they had to go in and like, all right, well, what's next? All right, you got to go and clean it up. Like just knowing how to use the tool is, especially with like Chat GPT and AI, like it's meaningless. It's like, okay, you've gotten to the base level where you could just type that into Chat GPT and it would tell you exactly how to do that.
Yeah. And I think I generally agree with you. You know, like, I don't know if I would like say Microsoft and them are the devil for that. Maybe for other reasons potentially, but like no, I don't feel that way. But I think it does. At least it's like thinking about some of those certifications. Maybe it gives you a framework to study certain things, and maybe to the hiring manager it indicates like you went through that framework and you were able to study those things. But like completely agree. I've never hired anybody because they have a certification, I will hire them. Like maybe it's a little bit of a help because it's an indicator that you're excited and you've done it, but it's certainly not that silver bullet that I think people want it to be. They're like, oh, if I get this, like I'll all of a sudden be in such crazy demand. I've never felt that way about it at all.
Well, it's funny because I actually talked to my alma mater, like the MBA cohort recently, about this specific topic. And off the cuff, my take was like, we live in a permissionless society. It's not like a driver's test where you need to have your driver's license in order to drive your car. You don't need to pass these certifications to go use the tool. Just go use the tool and go build your own thing. Like there's no authority figure that's telling you like you have to check this box and make sure that this is, in line or whatever. Just go and use it.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I think you're totally right. Let's see. I think, we've got time for a couple more here. Let's see. Here's an interesting one. So this is from Eline. Is there a data set which also includes Google Analytics data to make a dashboard and report to add to Power BI portfolio? I think I feel like I've seen you do some of these, and maybe it's Google AdWords, but I feel like I've seen you do this with your students. Maybe it was a couple of years ago where you gave them a data set of, I think, Google AdWords and maybe Google Analytics. Is that something that's publicly available?
Yeah, if you guys want to reach out, I could potentially, because I've got analytics running on my own site, I could potentially just dump that. Although it's not going to be a huge amount of traffic because I'm no longer kind of like pushing that platform.
Not pushing that much, yeah.
But yeah, so as far as Google Analytics goes, I think, like this must have been 5 years ago. I did have like a case study that I had built out. So if you guys go to Tableau Public and then type in either my name or Silvertone Analytics, you should be able to download the Tableau Public dashboard where I've worked with Google Analytics data. And that I think is like anonymized, like real data that has like quite a bit of traffic on there. But I really haven't worked that much with Google Analytics data.
Yeah.
But I mean, I have it. And like that, I'm like, the other thing that we're doing, John, I don't think I told you about this, but I've hired 2 of my former students and we're working on like developing a kind of like, have you ever heard of the company Book in a Box?
I don't think so.
So it's like they interview you and they turn that into a book. We're kind of doing a similar thing, but for like podcasts. Cool. And we're testing out like TikTok, Reels, all the different, and we're just using AI to clip the podcast. So like, if you guys are interested, it's early stage yet. But like I could dump some of that because that data is just a test for me. Like I'm not interested in monetizing that directly. I'm more about like developing the form to then sell to, pretty established consultants in my network.
Fun. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. That would definitely be really cool. The other thing I would say, so I'm trying to find a link to it right now and I'm Googling it. I'm Googling Google Analytics Conversion University and I'm getting so many other results that are not the thing that I'm trying to find. But for a long time, and I think it's still there somewhere, but I can't find it, is Google has their like Conversion University, which is it's sort of their structured version of go through and play with Google Analytics, potentially play with Google AdWords, Tag Manager. Like they have different modules, and it's pretty good. It's like a video-based self-paced courses, and the nice thing about it is it's totally free too. So like that is one that I've always recommended people do. And we had considered making a Google Analytics course at Maven Analytics, and I talked to a bunch of instructors about it, and I think the things were the the product that Google Analytics put out was already pretty good, and it was just challenging to what you really want is to be able to have live data to play with, and it can be that was the biggest challenge for me, is trying to figure out how do I get people live data, in a way that's secure. And I talked to a bunch of potential instructors and haven't cracked that one yet, but maybe we will in the future. But John David, thank you so much. Always a blast to catch up. I'm sure the audience got a ton out of this today. So
thanks for having me.
Yeah. And we'll hope to see you again soon. And everybody else, thanks for coming. Hope to see you guys at Open Campus.